right. So in general, I mean, I studied 200 years worth of conspiracy media. People can find a book on this that I've published. You can find that on Amazon as a print book and also as an ebook. So obviously, I've looked at everything that happened in the 90s. And so it's noteworthy that the conspiracy authors and the radio hosts and everything, they completely lost interest in Russia, starting in the 90s. So they started to talk about UFOs a lot and aliens, and they were rehashing some old material, kind of the bread and butter stuff about the bankers and Jewish people and whatnot. So this was like an era when you grew up in that era, or you were becoming an adult or were an adult in the 90s, you just didn't hear much of anything about Russia. It was always about, this grand conspiracy. So for many people in general in the 90s, you grew up, you don't know anything about the Russians, you don't know much about the Cold War, it's just very far away from you. So this was a perfect fit for the Russian strategy, in the 90s. The Russians did not want a specific type of attention. If you looked at, the long-term communist plans and what they were doing, the Russians wanted everybody to focus on other things. And so you had these horrible best-selling books in the 90s, like Behold a Pale Horse by Cooper and stuff like that. And so in the early 90s, you saw, especially when Clinton became president, you saw more right-wing activity, conservative activity, groups that formed, everything. But that, a lot changed when the Oklahoma City bombing happened. This was a very serious, discrediting event. And, interestingly enough, Tim McVeigh was a truther. He was a classic standard truther. He was reading, even when he was in the military, he was in the Gulf War, right? He was he was in the U.S. Army.
He was
one of the best gunners, I believe, on a Bradley tank or something. So he had almost like a perfect score. He was very disciplined. He wanted to rise up the ranks, and eventually, even before he was in the Gulf War, he wanted to join Special Forces. So that was his dream. He wanted to become a super soldier. But even when he was in the military, he was handing out stuff, I think, from the John Birch Society, and he was into this novel. What was it called? The crazy white power novel, The Turner Diaries, right? So
The Turner Diaries, yes.
It's this crazy novel about...
And if I'm not mistaken, Turner is an anti-Semite, right? He's a virulent anti-Semite.
Yeah, it's very racist and crazy, and this sort of a terrorist strategy of provoking everybody and provoking other people's actions, and then it becomes a civil war, and even nuclear weapons are being used, and the white race survives. Sort of, that's kind of the stuff that he was into. And this was fairly common in, truther circles. He was a complete and utter conspiracy believer activist. Now, when the bombing happened, of course, the activists out there, they were horrified because, everybody looked bad. So they tried to paint Tim McVeigh as a deep cover agent of the grand globalist conspiracy, even though he was one of them. He was a truther. So I looked at that case, just get the best literature on this, because there's also bad literature on this, obviously. So this was a federal building, the Alfred P. Murrah building in Oklahoma City, so of course back then the so-called feds were the enemy. Anybody who had an office there, the ATF. Everybody was regarded as an enemy. And the idea that Tim McVeigh had was that the globalists, Bush and these globalists would soon launch a grand coup d'etat of some sort in America. They would disarm the patriots, put them in concentration camps, have tanks rolling around with United Nations flags. The power of government would largely be handed over to the United Nations. So people were waiting for this event. Now, of course, now it's so many decades later, this event still hasn't happened. But back then, people were thinking, this is going to happen. We need to do something drastic now. We cannot wait. And as far as we can tell, Tim McVeigh Tim McVeigh had a fairly normal childhood, not a happy childhood. His parents were working all the time, and that became sort of mingled with this conspiracy thing. The capitalist conspiracy was forcing his parents to be away all the time and whatnot. And he got a few bumps to the head. He got a few serious bumps to the head, loss of consciousness, brain damage, and that became an issue later in the Gulf War. He was not a criminal for a long time. No prior criminal history, wasn't known as a troublemaker. He tried different things in terms of a career, but then he got into the military. And he got into the truthers. His favorite movies, or among his favorite movies, was the film Red Dawn, which is about a communist invasion where they parachute troops and these groups have to form. I think they're called the Wolverines, and they have to improvise and fight the commies. So that was his favorite movie back then. Mm-hmm. He was reading magazines like Soldier of Fortune and all that. And he started, he was working a lot. He wanted to be discipline and make some money, but that just tired him out. He was pretty much worn out. So he wanted to join the special forces, but of course he wasn't qualified yet. So he joined the regular military, and he was hoping to be the best soldier, perfect score, always clean shoes, everything perfect. And at a later stage, he wanted to join the special forces. Now, it was a pretty bad experience for him, the Gulf War. He was interpreting the whole event according to conspiracy mythology. So the evil globalists, the elders of Zion, were concocting all of this. So they were shooting at the Iraqi military, blah, blah, blah. He just became obsessed with this framing, with this interpretation of it. And so when he was not in the military, when he was back home, he was going to gun shows. He was connecting with all sorts of activists like Terry Nichols. And at some point, he left the military because after the war, he was so worn out. He was not quite in the condition to be, tough enough for the selection process of the special forces. So he didn't want to be a regular soldier. He could have been a great regular soldier, moving up the ranks, superiors liked him and everything. But he sort of went back to these old jobs that he was working, so burnt out and getting deeper and deeper into conspiracy and right-wing activism. So that meant some weirdo schemes, with credit cards, fraud, and he got himself into this hole deeper and deeper and deeper. And this is sort of like a tactic that even intelligence agencies use. They will get you more into trouble, so your options become more and more limited. So the only people that still trust you and like you are the people from a specific group, like these activists. So anytime he got into trouble,
do you think that he was recruited by somebody in East German intelligence who was a double agent working for West German intelligence at Logan City?
Definitely has to be looked into. There was this German guy who was actually related to a very important politician here who was infiltrating that whole scene. And so it's like a recruitment doesn't have to be in a traditional way. So like this guy is saying, hey, I'll work for important people, work for me, I can give you this and that. There are different kinds of recruitments or half recruitments where somebody advises you to do something and helps you, gets you out of trouble. But they call it rolling you down the hill. They get you into more trouble. And the more trouble you are with the United States government, the more you hate the government, the more you believe the conspiracy mythology. And so this is kind of his downward spiral. He was becoming a complete and utter activist. And he was seeing that other activists were passive. They were waiting for something to happen. He wanted to be someone who actually does something. So McVeigh and Nichols, they're starting to buy ammonium nitrate. So you can make this fuel bomb out of it. I think it's like they call it ANFO. It's like fuel oil.
A fertilizer bomb.
Yeah, fuel oil and ammonium nitrate. And they bought nitromethane. and they were stealing Tovex from, I think, a construction site or some kind of place that had it, and so they have this capability. And he was a kind of above average intelligence. He was perfectly capable of pulling off this attack, learning how to make a bomb, testing explosives, and figuring out how this stuff works. Because some people will claim he could never do this, he could blah blah blah. No. He was really capable of doing this stuff. And we don't know who helped him exactly and what connections these helpers really had.
There seems to be some bungling by the FBI, some covering up of certain details, depending on the journalist that you trust in this matter. And there was a claim there was a Saudi intelligence officer possibly peripherally involved as well. Not a Saudi, sorry, a Iraqi, Saddam Hussein. Had maybe sent an intelligence officer there, but
because that's how
I don't know
it works the same in left-wing terrorist circles as in right-wing terrorist circles. Oh, you meet somebody, and that person says, "Oh, I know this guy. I can introduce you to this guy, and he can help you with whatever the heck." And he was. So the plan was.
So how many? There was a preschool right near where the bomb went off, and it killed all these children. So preschool children.
One of the ideas was to detonate the bomb at night when nobody was there, to make this statement against the feds, the federal agencies and whatnot. But and supposedly McVeigh didn't know about this child care center that was in the building. He had this all worked out, and he tried to get all the details right, but of course he got things wrong. So his plan was to conduct the attack and then just go underground and link up to a group like the National Alliance or Elohim City. But these groups were very much infiltrated by various players. So, for example, there was this German guy. He was actually an agent. His name was Andreas Karl Strassmayr. He was actually, get this, he was the son, I can't even believe I'm saying this, he was the son of the chief of staff of Helmut Kohl, the German chancellor. He was the son of the chief of staff of the German chancellor, right? And so
1994 of all times. This is a very strange. And of course, he's there. What is he doing in Elohim City? And is this son a double agent?
Now he was interviewed, of course, because he was evacuated. He just left and made some conflicting statements afterwards, and he was tracked down by journalists. I think Spiegel magazine and others, they found him and they asked him about it, and he gave this convoluted story of his job was to spy on right-wing circles because he was a German. He could pass off as a neo-Nazi and play that role, blah, blah, blah. But his statements never really were convincing.
Well, since when did what? He was spying on Elohim City with the cooperation of the FBI? What is that?
He would never really say that. He would be asked that question, and I looked up the interviews that he gave to German media, and they were asking him about American connections and this and that, but he would always say no. It was very limited, very very small in scale, and when this went south, he just left because he didn't want to get arrested and all that. There was another spy that we know of. This was a source of the ATF agency in Elohim City. And this source, this informant, was reporting Strassmayr. She was, I think it was a woman, and she was warning about Strassmayr. She didn't know, of course, that he was attached to, whatever. She was saying that this guy is potentially dangerous. So.
And Strassmayr working for West German intelligence.
Yeah, sort of, but he would never really say exactly in what capacity and exactly who was his handler.
This is a really. You got a major terrorist event, the biggest terrorist event to that point on American soil, and you have a German spy involved, connected to it, and you don't question him, you don't get to the bottom of it?
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, obviously, he should have been debriefed. Maybe he was, and we never get to hear about it. And German intelligence is, of course, a problem. It's a mess now. Of course, we have the Interior Intelligence Agency, which is very small, and it's always been infiltrated. I mean, you can look up all the scandals, highest-ranking intelligence people who worked for the Soviets and everything. It's horrible. Then we have the Foreign Intelligence Service, which has also been very much infiltrated again and again, and this became public, so we know the names, we know who worked for the Soviets after all. So it's a huge issue. It's a huge cluster of problems when we get this German agent at that place at that specific time, because if he was following orders of his superior, we don't know who his superior ultimately worked for. If this guy was working for maybe the Russians or whoever. Right, huge problems.
Right,
so,
we don't know, and then of course this was so helpful to Mr. Clinton in getting him reelected president.
Oh yeah.
I should add a footnote to Timothy McVeigh. Timothy McVeigh was convicted and sentenced to death. He was put in a maximum security prison together with one of his people locked up with him was Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, who was a famous left-wing environmental terrorist. He blew up people. He sent mail bombs to people, blew up all kinds of folks. I don't remember how many people he killed and maimed. It's quite a number. And they hunted him for a long time. Well, Kaczynski was in this maximum security, and they became friends. And there's a book about this, and in which Kaczynski's quoted after Timothy McVeigh's execution. He said, Tim was a good guy. He said, Tim had this idea that we should join forces, the far left and the far right, because we had the same enemy.
Yeah. When in 1996, a novel was published called Unintended Consequences, and the plot is about so-called patriots who assassinate members of the government, government officials. And so this is like this big grand strategy. And McVeigh really liked this novel, that came out in 96. So he basically thought that I should have picked that strategy, instead of making this truck bomb and blowing up this building, I should have done it the other way, just attack and withdraw, kind of like what the Unabomber did, because he was sitting like in this little cabin hut in Montana, I think it was. So he was completely off the grid. He barely existed in an official capacity. And he was making these packages with bombs, and he was sending it to people that represented to him technology, because he thought technology was the root cause of all evil, and we should all live in a cabin in the woods and, live inside nature. So he thought by destroying the infrastructure, by destroying the people, you can destroy evil. And so that was why the Unabomber was so hard to catch, because he was in the middle of nowhere. But ultimately, he was caught by through his own vanity. He had a very high IQ, I think in the 150s. I think he was a mathematician by his training. And he worked for a couple of years, made some money, bought this property in the middle of nowhere. So he was arrogant, highly intelligent, but then he wrote these letters, and he wrote this manifesto, I think something like The Industrial Society and Its Problems, or whatever it was called. And so the FBI started to do, forensic linguistics. They tried to analyze his style of writing, and his manifesto was written in the style of a dissertation, a scientific text, but it was kind of outdated in style. So they thought he was probably a bit older, and he had a scientific background. He was not just some nobody with a low level of education. And this is kind of how they created a profile. And at some point, some of, I think, his relatives or somebody recognized the details, and they gave a tip to the authorities. I think that's how he was called. Yeah. But this is not how it went for McVeigh. I mean, McVeigh thought he had it all planned out. He had an escape vehicle. he had an escape vehicle, but he was stopped by police because the vehicle wasn't perfect. The registration or the taillight or whatever.
Yeah, I think it was a taillight, maybe.
Yeah,
I don't remember.
They arrested him. They arrested him for this infraction, and only when he was in jail, that's when the police actually realized that he's the prime suspect in the Oklahoma City bombing, because the FBI conducted a search, the cars and the apartments of Nichols, and they found some evidence in the trash can. There was a hand-drawn map of Oklahoma City in the Murrah building, and there were some other things where McVeigh slipped up, so he left traces, and then the FBI could pull the pieces together. So this was a bad day for the truthers, for the radical, the radical truthers. So immediately they did the standard program, which is the same program that the Russians use. Whenever something like this happens, Oklahoma City, 9/11, whatever, they always say it was the feds, the CIA or some other federal agencies.
An inside job.
It's the globalists behind it, the elders of Zion behind it, and the people involved are just patsies or agents, deep cover agents run by whatever. And this is sort of the standard program, which the activists then used. So you had Alex Jones doing stuff about the Oklahoma City thing and many others. And this became sort of this ever-growing idea of how this all went down. There are some interesting anomalies that should be looked at, but it's always this pre-ready-made assumption or conclusion. They start with a conclusion. It must have been the feds. It must be the globalists. And then they try to find anything that will fit this narrative, and they really don't look at anything else. And some of these guys that did material on OKC, and also the earlier thing with Waco. This was in 93, right? The Waco siege?
Waco was, 93, yes.
Yeah, and then I think there was another one, the Ruby Ridge incident.
Ruby Ridge, yes. And where the wife was really the conspiracy theorist more than the husband. And this is John Ronson, in his book, Them, Adventures with Extremists. He went up there and he interacted with him, and he felt genuine compassion for this man whose son was shot. The son went after his dog. The FBI and the ATF had surrounded this place with snipers. They shot his son. They shot his wife holding his baby. It was really a black eye for the U.S. government, because they mishandled this. This should not have caused anybody's deaths. This guy had not really done anything wrong. His wife was a crazy conspiracy theorist, but these people weren't really dangerous. Yeah, they were just trying to twist his arm into being a government informer, and he didn't want to do it.
And
he didn't want to be a government informer.
You saw sort of a new generation of activists doing reports on Waco, Ruby Ridge, and Oklahoma City. People like Alex Jones. I mean, he actually went to Waco and he did some help, to rebuild the crazy church they had there or something. And there was some, I think, a documentary about Oklahoma City, and this became sort of a career-making thing. This is like the new guy. Alex Jones was the new guy in the 90s. He was using radio. He was using the early internet later in the 90s. He was doing his documentaries, and they were sold as VHS tapes and copied by people. They could actually make a dub of the tape and hand it to somebody else, going viral, some sort of. And so Alex Jones was building his career with this stuff, and then when 9/11 happened, it always was the same pattern, and always the same kind of interpretation of it, and it perfectly aligns with the Russian strategy and the Russian psychological warfare, because you never saw from the truthers, you never saw a professional analysis, you never saw anything that would be considered professional, really looking at the case and really focusing on the important bits and coming up with some sort of an assessment that would be of professional grade. It was always just reinforcing the stuff that the truthers already believed, and that even McVeigh believed. Oh, this is an attack by the globalists, and so we have to be more into this. We have to be more active and spread this stuff even further and fight this globalist conspiracy. Now, this was in the 90s. I think this is when Alex Jones launched his Police State series. It was like 4 movies ultimately. Police State 2000, Police State 2, The Takeover, and what they were called. And this was sort of a grand narrative of this United Nations conspiracy idea. The United Nations would take over America and lock up the patriots, and they would stuff these patriots in these concentration camps, run by FEMA. So this was kind of the paranoia that this event will come, that this big day will come when the patriots would have to fight. Now, obviously, this hasn't happened. There was no mass arrests of patriots. They're not stuffed into concentration camps run by FEMA. The United Nations is not running America, really, and this is not like what they said it was going to be. This was sort of the scene in the 90s. They were focused on those topics. They were not really talking about Russia. They were not really talking about China that much. It was always focused on these domestic topics and reinforcing that old narrative. They were always quoting stuff from older conspiracy books, from the 60s and 70s, the Birch books, and they were quoting stuff that was even older. It was always the international bankers, always the Rothschilds running everything. So this was what people believed a lot back then. And then, of course, after 9/11 and the internet, it exploded.